Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. Sorry about the sound quality. If it's rough, I am actually recording this on my AirPods in my car because I'm on vacation, nefariously recording this from inside of my car. The rest of the episode has been pre-recorded and won't have any of these technical issues, hopefully. In this episode, a conversation I had with my sister about Longlegs and a rewatch of Silence of the Lambs. Given some of the overlap thematically, I was curious to check that movie out again. Hadn't seen it in quite some time. And spoiler alert, it's still a stone cold classic. Do check the show notes if you're interested in only one topic or the other. Jump ahead about 30 minutes for the Silence of the Lambs review. If you want to skip the Longlegs conversation, we do get into spoilers on that film, although we start spoiler free. And of course, the big news this week, the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. I may have more to say about this in the future. I'm not a politician. I don't like being political on the podcast, obviously, but just as a person with an opinion, disappointing that we still have such easy access to such powerful weapons. Disappointing that our political discourse is so toxic that in so many ways this doesn't even seem surprising anymore. And disappointing or shocking that Secret Service failed so badly at their job. And when you combine this with, for example, the hammer attack on the Pelosi's about a year ago or 2 years ago, whenever that was, I do question how good these people are at their work. And is this just an illusion of security and hopefully does not encourage even more escalation of these type of violent events? I might have more to say about this when I record with Sona later this week. Sona and I will be discussing the two most recent episodes of Presumed Innocent. Many of you listened to that Presumed Innocent recap catch-up episode that Sona and I recorded. Not only will we be catching up on the two most recent episodes, we will also be speculating on the finale, which is just 1 week away. Big news, by the way, they announced that Severance, our most popular series here on the podcast, actually, I guess White Lotus has become more popular, but one of our most popular series here on the podcast will be returning. We knew it was returning, but now we have a date, the second week of January, 2025. So mark your calendars. We will definitely be covering that one here on the podcast. And this week we saw the finale of The Boys, or we will see the finale of The Boys, and do expect a short episode where I give you my opinion of this most recent season of the series, and perhaps also introduce some new series that have premiered recently. All right, enjoy the conversation.
All right, Celia, you went to see Longlegs. I saw this on Thursday night. I saw it at the preview screening, actually, and you saw it pretty quickly thereafter. This is a very small movie from Neon. They've been around for a long time, actually. There's a lot of little films they pick up, films that played at Cannes that are good but don't win the awards and make a little ripple at the box office in the US, but nothing really huge. And apparently they're trying to up their game the way that A24, for example, has done, gone from making little horror movies and little art house movies to making Civil War this year for $50 million. They now have a deal with HBO. All their movies go to HBO. For example, Love Lies Bleeding just went to HBO this week. If anybody hasn't caught up on that,
that was very good. Really good.
Very good. So like A24 up their game, Neon is trying to transition as well. This, however, Longlegs, the movie we're going to be talking about today, is actually still a low budget movie. It was not expected to be a really big deal, but I just had a sense that even though there's very little marketing around it, most of it is just these little weird videos they've put on the internet with symbols and no real traditional trailers for the movie. There was a lot of buzz among the horror fans specifically. And I just had a feeling this thing was tracking to open around where Maxine opened last week, which was around $7 million. And I'm thinking it's going to open with 12, maybe $15 million, which would be great. Like I said, Neon has never opened something this big. They opened The Immaculate earlier this year. The Immaculate made $17 million total. That was like the biggest release they've ever had. And this thing is tracking right now based on its opening day. We're recording this on Saturday, so the official numbers will be out by the time I publish this. It looks like it's going to open with at least $20 million, maybe like $23, $24 million over the weekend. All which is to say this thing could potentially become one of those horror word of mouth blockbusters. And there was a lot of buzz that built that up. And I bought into it. So I was excited enough to see it at a preview screening. Definitely wanted to see it. I'm a fan of horror, and we can talk about our horror fandom in general. This is from Oz Perkins, who, by the way, so if you didn't know this, Oz Perkins is Anthony Perkins, Psycho himself, his son, believe it or not. He started in Hollywood as an actor. He was in Legally Blonde, for example, the Reese Witherspoon film. And when he was much younger, like teenager, early 20s, he was in a lot of pretty popular films, and then transitioned into directing mostly low budget, almost all horror films exclusively to this point. And by far, this is his most polished and most prestigious film that he's had. So much of directing, especially when it comes to horror movies, I think, is being able to sell what is obviously on its face ridiculous and having really good tone management. And he has nailed that, I would say. He's really nailed that dread that permeates the entire film. But I had issues with this film. But before we get into any kind of spoilers at all, and we will spoil the movie here, but before we get to the spoilers, in general, what'd you think? What was your expectation of the movie? How did you hear about it? And what was your general opinion?
I saw it on trailers at the movie theater, which all the trailers lately are fantastic, by the way. So I saw this and was really thrilled that I might be able to see this really scary movie. And then they're comparing it to Silence of the Lambs, which I love.
Yeah.
So that's how I heard about it. So I go in, and I thought the first half of the movie, maybe even a little more than half, 3/4, up to like part 3, actually, was really good.
Yeah.
Really scary, mysterious. Although later, when we're allowed to talk about spoilers, I'm going to tell you how I figured a lot of this stuff out with some pretty simple clues at the beginning of the movie. But that didn't spoil the movie for me. And normally it would.
Right.
So I thought it was really good and creepy, and I love the performance. The Psycho with the sound in this movie is amazing also, by the way. Really scary and like intense, and it goes right through you. But then I became very disappointed.
Yes.
And a little sad, because I don't think that was a good resolve at the end there, or non-resolve. I don't even know what happened, honestly. I'm like, what does this all mean? Anyway, I think it fell apart for me right around part 3.
Yeah. Yes, I think this is a big problem with the film. The screenplay to a large extent, and even as you mentioned, there's that part 1, part 2, part 3. There's a pretty short part 1, very long part 2, and then part 3. And I agree, part 3 is the worst. Part 2 is really long, and I don't even know why it's divided there. A lot of this, I feel, is unnecessary and oddly structured. So a lot of the problems, I think, are in the screenplay, especially in the resolution. And once again, we will spoil this later, but not right now. I would say that anyone who's thinking about seeing this film, it really is about the type of story that's being told at the end, because I think for some people, they're going to love this type of story. Oh, I love that it turned into this. An example I would make of this is, in very different terms, but the movie Hereditary, where for me, Hereditary is almost a perfect film for the vast majority of it. And then it has this absolutely batshit finale, which I kind of love. And it, for me, works in the themes of the first 2/3, 3/4 of that movie, which are really all about this family that has this mental disorder, which is inherited from one generation to the other. So when it's explicitly some kind of curse that is haunting the family, it doesn't necessarily take away from what is already thematically in the film. And I would say this is similar, where for some people, they're going to love this ending, but I don't see how that improves on what was coming from the first 2/3 of the movie. And caveat here that I had told you as part of this preparation for this conversation, hey, let's also rewatch Silence of the Lambs. And I think I did myself a disservice by watching Silence of the Lambs, like literally within a day of seeing this film, because that is a nearly perfect film from a script standpoint. Like, it's so tight. There is like not a missed scene in that entire film or performance or anything else. And this obviously is more uneven. It's shaggier, I think intentionally so. It is the film it wants to be. It's maybe just not the film I wanted it to be, if that makes sense. So yeah, so I have many caveats there. Okay, so we're going to start spoiling the film. We're not going to get to the end yet, but I'll start laying out some of the plot. And then, so you can tune out now if you don't want to be spoiled at all. But no heavy duty spoilers for this segment here. I'm just going to set up the story pretty much. We have the star of the film, played by Micah Monroe. By the way, from It Follows. Quick announcement, Celia, the sequel to It Follows is being shot right now and is coming out in 2025. So 2025 shaping up to be a great year for horror films.
The first one was
so good.
Fantastic. So
a bad ending once again. That's a bad ending too, but doesn't derail the film in the way that this one. Oh,
it's so good.
The rest of the film is great.
From the first scene, that first scene is amazing. So
speak about tone management, right? There's a film that it's managed its tone perfectly from beginning to end.
Thing is, with the sequels, I always want them to be as good as the first one. So I think
It Follows. I don't know if it's going to be as good, but I think It Follows has the opportunity. That metaphor is so interesting. Anyway, maybe we have a whole conversation about It Follows when the next one comes out. So let's save that for now. I'd love to rewatch that film. So as far as this film goes, Micah Monroe, a young FBI agent, very reminiscent of Silence of the Lambs. She has a sixth sense, literally. She is able to identify a random number generated 50% of the time, which would be this astronomical, by the way. Think about it. If you have to guess 16 random numbers like she does, out of 1 to 100, 16% of the time, you'd be lucky enough to get one of those numbers correct. She gets 50% of them right. She is definitely psychic. That would be proof positive that you were a psychic person, which apparently she is. And on her very first case, I think this is maybe her very first case or early on, she has a sense about something going badly. It does go badly, very badly for her partner specifically. And this is when Blair Underwood, playing her boss in the kind of Jack Crawford role, if you want to parallel it to Silence of the Lambs, brings her in on this much more high profile case about the serial killer. And another film I drew bad parallels to, because it's still a better film, unfortunately, but I'll call it out here as a recommendation, is the Japanese movie Cure. There are letters in the house with these symbols written in a codex and signed Longlegs in English. And it's in every single one of these murder scenes. There's been 10 of them in 30 years. So that's the connection, is these birthday cards. The murders all occur around the time of the birthday of one of these young girls in the home, or the young girl in the home. But there's no indication that there was a third party in the home, anyone other outside of the family. And then the father kills the family. Obviously, very grisly details here. How do you prove that someone's a serial killer when they apparently are not inside the home? Problem number one. Problem number two, who is this person at all? And obviously, there's this Zodiac-like codex that ties these things all together. So it's almost certainly the same person, but how do they catch them? And then that's what unravels within the rest of the film, this mystery that unfurls. And as you would expect, the story actually starts to intersect with the investigator, with Micah Monroe's character, with her own backstory. And as you mentioned, this is beautifully designed. There's a lot of comedy here. I think that a lot of the comedy works. The audience laughed, even though there's this incredibly oppressive tone that the characters are reacting to the uncomfortable situation they're in. And there's actual jokes that land, not unintentional jokes, intentional jokes. So it's really amazing that he's able to pull this off. There's also something that's in all of his films, this fairy tale-like tone. And you see him showing up at these abandoned barns and at these abandoned locations around the Midwest, presumably, and all really beautiful. The photography is so classical, so beautifully done. There's a great scene that one of the scariest scenes in the whole movie to me, probably unintentionally. They walk into this barn and the camera passes them and continues to pass through the doorway. And I thought I saw something move and I had ice go down my spine just because of the tone of the film. There was absolutely nothing in the frame, but that's how effective it is at times in managing that tone. All that setup is really powerful, as you mentioned. The visuals are beautiful. The design work, the design of a particular character that keeps reappearing under this black veil is really disturbing, really disturbing. All that stuff works really well. And then we get to the ending and we can hold off on that. Is there anything you want to add before we get into the specific of the details of the ending?
It was everything you just said, but also the soundtrack is fantastic.
Yeah.
It goes perfectly with the movie also. But the sound that I was talking about before, when you hear the evil, sinister, Longlegs creature, we don't even know what it is. Is he a clown? Is he trying to be more feminine? Like, what's up with the makeup? And he's just so weird. When you hear him speak, whoever did the sound for this movie, it's crazy. Everything sounds like an echo and so much creepier than I thought it was going to be. How creepy was that?
Yeah, the sound design is excellent. I agree. He's a big fan of David Lynch, and of course, Lynch is famous for his sound design as well. And like a Lynch film, 90% of the terror is in the sound design. There's a moment in the film where she finds a photograph of Longlegs when she's exploring her own home. And when she sees the photograph, we only see the actual photograph for a split second. And then the sound design kicks in. But also we see these images of crime scenes and also of these symbols and these snakes. It's all a flash cut really quickly. And it is a total jump scare just in the edits. It's not like a jump scare like a cat jumping at the camera. It's just the actual technique on the film. I, once again, had ice go down my spine at that moment. And most of it is sound design, like you mentioned.
And
so so all of this is extremely effective. Yeah, exactly. So now, all right, we're going to get into spoilers here. The two huge problems I have with the film. One is I think that this is my personal taste. The story takes a turn, despite these parallels to The Silence of the Lambs, and even early on, this obvious indication that this girl would have to have psychic abilities to be able to not only get these hunches as the film goes more and more into the supernatural. It's not only that I'm not a huge fan of a supernatural explanation. I find the explanation a little weak, to be honest, and we can get into those details when we break it down. But as someone who has defended Nicolas Cage as a performer many times, I liked him in Mandy, much more in the first half of Mandy than the second half of Mandy. I loved him in Pig. I thought he gave an incredible performance. You really remember what an incredibly talented actor he is and how subtle he can be. I prefer the subtle, but I don't mind when he goes over the top and uses it sparingly. I honestly felt that this performance, and I think this is going to be divisive for general audiences, I found this performance took me completely out of the film. Like it didn't work for me at all.
I thought it was great. I loved his performance in the film. Yes.
Wow. I'm surprised that you're not more enthusiastic about the film, because that is for me the thing that really took me out of the film the most.
No, he was I don't know if I find clowns to be a little extra creepy than other people. Like just something so repulsive and weird about them. And that's probably why I love the Joker movie, that you're like, I'm like, oh my God. So I thought his performance was really good. He was just the weirdest person. He was hard to read. Like, what's going on? Is he really the killer? Is he how is he killing these people without getting into their houses? It's not like he's Manson and he's got this weird charm. He's just so weird. So I thought he did a great job there. That's not where I begin to dislike the movie a bit. And it had nothing to do with him. But I was disappointed in his character, the way it was written at the end, because of many reasons. But what did you not like about it? His performance.
It was, first of all,
Carlos did not like it.
Yes, I did not like it at all.
He did not.
Yeah, I agree. I'm with Carlos on this one. It's complicated because after I saw the film, I think I knew what he was going for, the filmmaker, who also wrote the screenplay, by the way, Oz Perkins. And he was giving an interview and he was saying that him and Nicolas Cage shaped the performance together and that their goal was to make this guy pathetic, right? And I did get that. But I don't think it works. He doesn't want to glamorize evil, basically, right? So he's making this guy a pathetic schlub. You see how he reacts when that girl rejects him. By the way, we're full spoilers here, everybody, if anyone's still listening. When he's talking to that girl at the auto shop or whatever, and she calls dad, and he overreacts to it. He loves T-Rex, who was big in the late 60s, early 70s. I think Bang a Gong comes out in 72, which is T-Rex's biggest hit. T-Rex died early, by the way, died in the 70s in a car accident. He takes on that affectation, the glam rock, the long curly hair, the colorful outfits. This is supposedly the 90s. So this is 20 something years later. He's still trying to dress like Mark Bolan from the late 60s, early 70s. And that's like a reference point. All the music on the soundtrack is from T-Rex. And he's had plastic surgery. So maybe he's trying to continue to be young. And so he's a pathetic figure, right? Theoretically, all these things make him pathetic, but yet he has supernatural powers. So it's contradictory to make this guy a clown, like you mentioned. And then those two things don't mesh that well for me. But go ahead. What did you like so much about the performance?
I just like that every time I saw his face or heard his voice, I was so deeply disturbed and repulsed. Good job. If that is what you were trying to get people to feel, you're doing an amazing job, because this person, I'd be running away. I could never be near this person. He was really good at that.
Tell me what the things didn't work for you at the end.
The whole magic doll thing does not work for me. Like, I'm like, what? I'm simplifying it, but really that's what it comes down to, magic haunted dolls. And when I was first starting to watch the movie, as soon as they went to the second scene, I said to Carlos, oh, that was her when she was little.
Yeah, exactly.
And he's like, no, that she is an FBI agent and she is looking for this guy because he did something to that little girl. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. Yeah. And then after they talked about the birthdays, I'm like, oh,
yes,
he must be related to her somehow. Is he her dad? What's going on? Why is he so interested in everyone's birthday that happens to be this FBI lady's birthday? Right. The girl in the beginning of the movie, when he's like, oh, my almost perfect, he knew her and went there for her birthday party. And he's also killing people on this birthday. So if you didn't know that was her in the first scene, maybe you could just not see that ending coming. Because I was like, oh, he must be her dad. But really, who does it turn out to be? He's responsible for the magic dolls.
Right.
But it turns out it's her mother.
Right.
So I feel like I have psychic powers.
Not quite. I think that like you said, I think it's pretty obvious what the film is doing, and I assume it's intentional because they don't hide any of this. I do agree that because we don't see Nicolas Cage's face, and that first scene, you could read it either way. When I first saw that scene, I'm like, oh, this is her backstory. But then when you hear that these young girls are always there at the scenes of the crimes, I'm like, this could have also been one of the most recent crimes. So I'm 50-50 at that point. I'm not saying definitely one thing or the other. I'm just waiting for the film to tell me what I'm supposed to be paying attention to. And then, like you said, pretty early on, it's like, come meet my daughter, right? This is the Jack Crawford character, the Blair Underwood role he's playing, her boss. Come meet my family. And then they're sitting in a room and they're like, oh, it's my birthday in X number of days within a week. And, oh, my birthday too. And then we know already that it's like this guy kills people within 6 days of their birthday. I'm like, what do you think? That this girl whose birthday is the 14th wasn't one of the people that he visited in his past. And that's why she has the ability of seeing all these things ahead of time. Once again, I feel like the film is telling us that before she even starts the investigation practically, right? So I don't know if you're psychic or if the film is laying it out for us. And if they were trying to hide it in some way, which I don't even think they were, I didn't think they did a great job of that. I do agree that if that had been more of a surprise at the end, maybe that would be a little more of oh my God, she's the one. But I feel like when she shows up back at her house, it's like fate. It does not feel like, I can't believe this is where we ended up. It's like, it's been telling us that from the first moment of the film. It feels like doom coming, which once again, I feel like maybe that is the intention of the film. So I don't know if that is necessarily something I would ding it for. This is my own pet peeve. Like you said, the dolls thing just doesn't work for me. And once again, I'm comparing it to films. My mistake always, I'm comparing it to films that are better in the film Cure, which I'm not going to spoil here, but let me just say that in that film, someone is able to just meet people, talk to them, ask them this mundane questions. And what starts to happen is in their own minds, they start to drive themselves nuts and they lash out at the people who are closest to them. And that's why they commit these crimes. But what's happening is it's as if he is tapping into something in their psyche and unleashing it, right? And this is the movie Cure. So once again, in my mind, waiting to see that, like an exploration of how someone could just push you into doing something that maybe is a secret black fantasy of yours. But they put this magic doll in your house, and within a day, everyone is like hail Satan and chopping up their family. There's no psychological aspect to this. And I think that's the thing I've discovered. I need a psychological hook to hang all these things on. It can't just be like voodoo doll makes you kill people. That's weird. I don't buy that. Think about the whole final confrontation there at the very end when she shows up there. It's not even like he's been grooming this family for months. He just puts it's not even him, it's her mother, puts the doll in the house, and they're all like, oh, must kill my family. I'm like, what? Like, it's that whole final scene. Once again, in my own head, I could write the fact that maybe the doll was there and he was talking to the girl and he met with her a bunch of times, and little by little, he's infiltrating the family. I could write that. But then that final confrontation, she shows up with the box, and 5 minutes later, they're zombies. This does not work for me at all. Not at all.
And the last scene was just a final straw. She can't even kill this doll.
Right.
I was
you know what I thought the twist was going to be.
What's wrong with her gun? Did she run out of bullets? No, she didn't use that many bullets. Oh, it's indestructible. And Carlos is like, all she's got to do is get more bullets. Is it really indestructible? What's going on? She's not possessed.
No.
But is she what does that mean? She's in charge of something now? She's got to watch out for these other possibly haunted people, because that kid next to her is haunted still.
No, she's protecting the girl. She's protecting the girl because remember that theoretically she is going to go kill herself, because the doll can remain. And if the doll remains, then the girl is spared, right? That's the deal that the mother made. So theoretically, she's not killing the doll. This is how I read it anyway. I could be wrong, but she doesn't destroy the doll, because remember when they they found the doll of the girl who was in the mental institution. What's her name? Shipka, the actress. When they found her doll, that once they opened the orb, she killed herself, right? So that was the bargain they made, right? The devil's bargain, literally, that they made, that the mother said that she wouldn't kill the daughter. And that way, like, preserving the doll preserves the daughter. But then I don't know sure how that works, because when she shot the doll and then that black smoke went into her, what does that mean? Like, does it mean that whatever was contained in the doll theoretically would drive her to kill herself, right? Just like all these other people who survived it and killed themselves theoretically. So I don't know. It's confusing, and it doesn't read cleanly.
The whole thing is a mess. How did this guy get the power to make these haunted dolls? How?
Oh, wait, no, exactly. That's a whole other thing.
He's like, oh, my boss, he lives underground. He lives under all the ground.
Mr. Downstairs. He's downstairs everywhere. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, everywhere. So how did he become chosen by the downstairs master to then make these dolls? Because did the devil give him the power to do this? So he was chosen by the devil, and his mission is to make these haunted dolls. And then he got followers, so he didn't have to do it himself. And the follower was her mother, because he went to her house
to save
on her birthday.
Right, because she didn't kill her.
But everything I just said makes no sense. It's hard to justify.
The doll is the fundamental problem, exactly like you said. The problem with the doll itself is such a big issue, because I think that we are not supposed to see Longlegs as this superpower. I think you're absolutely correct. In the same way that her mother got coerced into being this facilitator, theoretically, you would assume it happened to him at some point in the past too. So this is just part of a chain of behavior, right? Like of these accomplices.
It's like he was chosen because he's like Geppetto.
That's the fundamental problem. Exactly that. If you want to make these people just purely pathetic, you can't have them actually working for the devil at the end. Is that to have these people, the mother as well, be these pathetic people who got sucked up into this psychosis, fine. I'm there for that movie. If they are just pathetic and they've thrown their lives away doing these horrible deeds, fine. That makes sense for me too. But they are literally channeling the supernatural. So it's almost not necessarily, basically what it comes down to is you could read this film as like, they're the ones who are right. Like they're the ones who have a connection to the supernatural world. They can make these dolls that can brainwash people. Like that's a pretty incredible talent to have, right? You're not going to have that. You're not going to get that from working at Kmart, right?
And the dolls look like the victims.
Exactly like the victims. Exactly. Yeah. So he's good at making those.
Occurs to me. I'm like, the girl who worked in the gas station or convenience store, did he have a doll of her? Like weird thoughts were popping through my head after I found out about this.
These places seem to be chosen, right? He sees these houses. They were so white. We see that actually really beautifully rendered at the very beginning where he sees that house. And I remember like when I saw it, I'm like, wow, the house looks so white on that hill. So it's as if he is seeing these places call to him at some way. So it's not just a random little girl walking down the street. It has to be more to it than that, apparently, according to whatever this mythology is. Let me tell you what I thought was happening at the end, where I thought, and maybe once again, I might have written an ending I preferred, and then I was disappointed I didn't get it. When she walks into the house and she's reacting the way she does, and she puts the gun to the doll's head, in my mind, I'm like, because of the other doll being destroyed, and now that evil's inside of her, and she is massacring this family, thinking she's rescuing them, right? And that's what I thought was actually happening there. So when she's got the gun to the doll's head, she's like actually has the gun to the girl's head, and she's misreading everything because she's now under the control of this evil. And that's what I thought we were seeing there at the end. And that's how it explains how some of these people get coerced, because what they're seeing is not reality either. So I thought that's what we were getting, but no, it's literally a doll with this ball inside of its head and yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, okay, I don't know. It all really falls apart for me at the end, which is unfortunate, by the way, because of how really incredible the setup is for those first more than half. Like you said, the first half, really incredible stuff. The imagery, such simple things, the way they arrive at that barn. It is reminiscent of Silence of the Lambs, like the way that Silence of the Lambs, it's continuously going deeper into the ground. Clarice goes down to see Lecter in his underground prison, but then later we go even further down, and then we're down in that when we go down and we go down. And in the same way that the film just keeps getting darker and going further down, I like the way that it's almost doing the same thing for these locations they show up at, as these like abandoned locations. And as they go from like one room to the other, and the camera is like stalking her from behind, is really nerve-wracking, right? And just really beautifully done. And all of that just to get to this really weird supernatural ending. I don't know. And then we end with bang a gong. I'm like, really? This is the button on the movie? I'm not sure.
I can't say I didn't like it because I liked so much of it.
Yes.
Until the end. This is how I feel about Lost. I loved that series, and then the end comes and I'm like, what? Were they dead? But I can't say I don't like everything else up to that point. And I feel like that about this. So I like this movie despite the end, is how I feel.
Yeah, I'm mixed on this movie, very mixed. I liked so much of the beginning of it, but then the more Nicolas Cage we get, the more out of it. He just took me out of the film. And then I really needed it to land at the end to pull me back towards it again. And I'm like, oh, that didn't work. So yeah, very mixed for me, very mixed. But I do want to see Perkins do more directing. He'll have 3 movies out within 15 months. The next one is produced by Jordan Peele, a Stephen King adaptation of the book, the story The Monkey, which is a very popular Stephen King story. So that's coming in January, I believe. So yeah, this guy has a lot of talent, and he's going to be working with bigger budgets. He's going to get a lot more opportunities coming soon. And if they had buttoned up this script, if someone had read his script and said, these stuffs are really good, you got to work on this and this, I think this thing could have really been great. And it's just, I can't even call it okay, because parts of it are exceptional and parts of it are just terrible for me. Some people, like I said, mileage may vary. Some people don't mind. They like a supernatural hook or whatever. I'm like, okay. People are afraid of dolls. Okay, whatever. If you're afraid of dolls, this will be very scary. If you have a lot of dolls in your room at night, you're going to have to get rid of all of them after you watch this movie. I didn't really love Longlegs, although I am still on board with the whole Perkins project. I want to see what he does next. But one of the big upsides of this Longlegs thing wasn't necessarily the film itself. It made me want to rewatch Silence of the Lambs, a movie that I've seen so many times when I was younger and now wanted to catch up with again. Haven't seen it in probably 10 years. I think I've seen it with Kim, so at least once. So we've probably seen it within the past 8 or 9 years. Definitely not in the past 5 or 6 years once Charlotte got to a certain age. You can't watch stuff you really want to watch, basically. She'd want to watch, and obviously not a movie to watch with kids. But I did catch up with it again, and I'm like, here's a movie that I always was just so knocked out by this film. I remember seeing it in the movie theaters on opening night. It opened on Valentine's Day of all things back in 1991. Played all year long, ended up winning the Academy Award for Best Picture that year, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Screenplay, Best Director. It swept all the major awards. I think One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is the only other film to have done that sweep. Obviously very well respected in its day. But I was curious, how does this hold up after all this time? And I rewatched it this week, as did you. And this movie is still absolutely incredible. Let's not spoil anything yet I'm sure there's younger people who haven't seen it. The vast majority of the audience probably has. But let's just in general talk about it without spoiling anything much. And then, of course, we could just have a full spoiler. I mean, for a movie that's 30-something years old, I think you can go full spoilers. But what was your experience of rewatching it? And what was your experience of originally watching it as well?
That movie is so eerie from even the first scene is a little eerie because you're starting to feel like this person's in deep danger. So what I love about the film is that everyone's really interesting. All the characters are extremely deep. You like stuff about them. You don't like certain things about them, but they all have a certain kind of charm and very true to their character without ever even missing a beat. So performances are amazing. And the tone, it never lags ever, which is very hard to do in a movie. I don't remember a single lag in that movie. And it stays with you. Yeah. Like when it's over, it stays with you. Sometimes we still love it after how many years? So it stays with you. And most movies cannot do that. Sometimes I'm like, I saw that movie, but I don't know what happened.
Yeah, culturally, it has stayed with us, right? Think about some of Hannibal Lecter's quotes and things like that it's endemic to the culture. And as part of this research, I'm like, how does this thing work for a younger audience? Is it just me still having the affinity for seeing it in the theater? I remember how electrifying it was to see that in the theater. You can only imagine seeing that with an audience who's never seen this movie before, the experience they've had and that you shared with those people. I'm like, but how does it hold up for people who've only seen it on TV or only seen it on TNT or watched it when they were 15 years old, 4 years ago? And here's the incredible thing about it, that I looked at Internet Movie Database, and on IMDb, I looked at all the movies that have it has 1.5 million ratings from viewers on IMDb. How many movies from the 90s have that many? There's only 4 other movies that have that number of votes or more from the 90s. So it's still incredibly popular today. And even more so, I looked on Letterboxd, because think about Letterboxd. Everybody who's on Letterboxd is probably 25 to 30 years old. Probably the average person is very young. And I looked at what are the most popular films with the most ratings. It's 41 on the list of all the most popular movies. And when I say that, like Avengers movies and the Dune movies that just came out this year, those are the ones that are above it. So it's like, this is like one of the very rare films on the top 100 list on Letterboxd. That's from the 20, 30, 40 years ago. Like The Godfather's up there. It literally is up there with like maybe 5 other movies, including The Godfather. That's how well respected this movie still is with younger audiences, which is astounding, but not surprising because it's really good. There's nothing bad about it across the board.
Everybody is amazing. You know how you don't really like the performance of the clown
Nicolas
person
Cage.
or whatever? The guy who is,
Anthony Hopkins.
one of the people. No, well, Anthony Hopkins, I don't even have to say because
Buffalo Bill.
Everyone knows. But Buffalo Bill is extremely creepy in a way that is even more disturbing, because there was a scene where she has to speak to him.
Yeah.
And you'd never know, right? He's really, and it's not a supernatural anything. The scariest thing to me are what people do to each other. That's the scariest thing. So it's like that movie.
Exactly what you said. Everybody's so good and the characters are so well-rounded. This is such an incredible screenplay, by the way. A lot of the dialogue is lifted directly from the book. If you haven't read Silence of the Lambs, you should definitely read it. It is much shaggier than the movie, which is so streamlined, but there's a lot of extra stuff in there, which is interesting. You get a lot more psychology. You get inside of Hannibal's head. You see what Clarice is thinking sometimes. Some of the things that they did with Clarice in the book, honestly, when you streamline a novel to the screen, the actors, that's what the actors have to do. They have to convey the stuff that is not available from the book. And I think she conveys something a little different about Clarice, but I prefer her interpretation of Clarice, basically, because I think the film has a real humanity to it, to your point. Jonathan Demme never made another horror movie again in his career. And at this point, he had made kind of quirky punk rock rom-coms, like they're very weird movies. They don't really fit into any specific bucket, but usually they always had a lot of music in it. He directed the Talking Heads Stop Making Sense movie. So he loves music, especially alternative music. He was a big promoter of that type of style of music. You hear it in the soundtrack here. The soundtrack's really terrific in Silence of the Lambs. But not only that, he comes from this background of being a real humane person, a real humane director. So an odd choice for making a horror movie. But like you said, it's like he brings that humane view to every single character. Every character, this is a complaint I have about Longlegs in comparison. Every character in Silence of the Lambs, when you see them, it's like you write a full biography of where they came from, what they did, good and bad, but they are all fully fleshed out people. And I look at the Micah Monroe character in Longlegs, and the more I try to imagine a biography for her, the more the movie falls apart. I'm like, so she didn't know about this that happened in the past, and I really don't know anything about her other than she has this contentious relationship with her mom. It's just a character that exists to move the plot along. When you watch Silence of the Lambs, I feel like you're seeing people doing what they do, and we're just intersecting in this moment in the film. And that's really rare. You really remember how rare it is when you see someone do it so well like they do here. I loved watching the film, the visual language of it. You never see the sun. The only time we see sun and color in the film is actually, ironically, at the very end, like the very final scene where Lecter is free, basically. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen this movie. But that's the only time we see colors other than blood in the film. Even in that opening scene where she is running through the woods, you hear that music, the Howard Shore score, which is actually, once again, excellent. This is David Cronenberg's go-to guy. He has basically worked with Cronenberg through all of his movies, and he brings that same sense of dread to this film. But like you mentioned, she's just running in the woods doing her exercises, and there is already this foreboding sense. But the film is also still very gray even then. And it's also the time of year, but it doesn't let the sun peek through. And we start there in this like gray palette, and then we go down. She goes to see Lecter, and she goes down underground. And then we see where Buffalo Bill is, and it's down and it's down. And we're going deeper and deeper. It's like it really feels as you're watching the movie that it is a horror film. There's something supernatural could potentially happen. That's how dark things are getting. And then but it never does obviously go that full route. But just the visual language of the film, it's inescapable, right? You just keep going further down and you can't go back up again until the very end of the film.
I did read the book, and I love Jodie Foster's performance.
Yes, I agree.
I like what you were saying before. I didn't want to interrupt you, but like I was thinking exactly that. But her performance, I love in this movie. She's innocent, just wants to do a really good job.
Yes.
She's got that like golly gee thing going for her. She's nervous, but she doesn't want to show she's nervous. And she's amazing. And she's really badass throughout the entire thing. She's learning. You could see her in her future being amazing. Right now, she is raw, and she just got thrown into the situation. And what's great about the movie, like we were talking about before, is when she's running and competing with these other guys in the FBI, and she's this little girl, I immediately know that I have to be worried about her. So it's great.
There's something
the whole way through.
You make a great point. The cinematography is it's not stylish at all. It is almost classical. And I remember when I was younger, I thought, even though this movie won Best Cinematography, I thought The one thing I would ding this movie for is that it should have been a little more stylish, right? That it needed a little more pizzazz visually. And what I realize now is I was totally wrong. Making something that looks this classical, you could watch this movie now, and other than having cell phones in it, this movie is completely timeless. It doesn't look like the 80s, like we just saw Manhunter as well, which is a very good movie, but it's so 80s that it places it in time immediately. This film does not feel aged at all because they didn't overdo the style, right? It didn't feel like 2000. It didn't feel like 1985. And that is, so what I thought was a little bit of a criticism back in the day, I was wrong. That going for a truly classical, plain, everything is framed beautifully, but it doesn't draw attention to itself. And I'm like, that's perfect. That is exactly the way you should shoot this movie. And of course, one very important thing in this film that is absolutely the special effect of all special effects is the incredible, you can write a whole thesis on the use of close-ups in this movie. Everybody is stepping into close-up. This almost violation at times when Lecter is getting closer. And Lecter, of course, is looking at her. It's an intense close-up. But of course, he's looking at us, right? So it's like they're looking right through us. And then we cut from this glaring cat or wolf licking his chops in close-up. And we cut to, exactly like you said, to her face in close-up, which is like an open wound, and he can't help himself. And it's so compelling. Both of those faces are incredible, and they're just there are times when you forget that like they are so close on them and it fills the entire screen. It's like just their eyes are filling the entire screen, and it's so effective. It's really powerful.
I like the way you like describe things. Describe the plot of that movie in few words.
The plot of the movie in few words is pretty simple, right? You have this young FBI agent who is being mentored by, and I think maybe this is important. I'm going to put subtext into my description, but she has this mentor. She has this background where she lost her father. She was very close to her father. He was a single parent because her mother had died even earlier. And now she is in the FBI. She's trying to save people. That is something that is like core to her. She's a very decent person, extremely decent person. Lecter calls this out, of course. And she thinks she can do some good by being in the FBI. And like you mentioned, it's not only her kind nature, but also this drive she has inside of her to finish her dad's work, to impress her father, who was absent, who was a police officer. And she has that father figure. And then she has another father figure. She has this Hannibal Lecter character who is also a father figure to her. He mentors her as well. And is this dichotomy of mentors and how she relates to both of them. She gets something from both of them. And I think that's why the film works so well, because there is this really powerful subtext there. And also, I think that the film is incredibly feminist without rubbing your face in it. I think that's another incredible, powerful thing about the film. Like you mentioned earlier, that the camera is at her eye level and she's a foot shorter than these guys at the FBI. So like you said, you always feel like she's in danger. The use of the camera at her eye level is so powerful that when you have the flashback to her as a little girl, when we cut to her walking into that funeral home as well, we know without them even showing the younger actress that we are in a flashback, because the camera's point of view is even smaller. She's now even smaller, right? So we know we've been traveled back in time even more. But the reason I bring that up is because there is this interesting feminist subtext to the film. If you notice, she is constantly having to negotiate these relationships with these men. She has to always flirt with them, or always be courteous to them, or mother them, or do something, right? Or make herself, for example, she uses it to her advantage later on, where they're like, no one's allowed to see Lecter. And she's just like, oh, just little old me. And then they let her go up there, right? So she's always has to use her femininity with these men. So it's like the subtext of the film is how she is learning to do that over the course of the film as well. Like you said, she is constantly in physical danger, right? Which, of course, in and of itself makes the film stressful because you're so closely aligned with her. You root for her, and she's constantly in harm's way. And she can't help but put herself in harm's way again. And she's pursuing this horrible killer who is butchering these women, making it turns out, skin suit out of them. And like, this film is really grotesque on the page when you think about it. It's so classy in execution, but it's like, this is really repulsive stuff. I know people who refuse to watch horror movies that like think Silence of the Lambs is like one of the best films I've ever seen. And they don't even get repulsed by what is really deeply repulsive. And of course, on top of everything I just said, it also has some incredible action scenes. And when I say action scenes, it is Hannibal Lecter's escape, which is incredible. It is the whole final confrontation. Once again, we've gone darker and now in pure black, and she's finding her way, literally feeling her way through the blackness in that final moment. Another incredible. I remember seeing that in the theater. My heart was in my throat. I was so terrified, and it still works now. Still makes you have goosebumps. But those aren't the only.
That escape was amazing. Yeah. I think, like, seriously, that if anyone has not seen the movie, just to watch the escape, it would be worth it. It was amazing. Just
the way it's executed. And so many times I will nitpick a movie being like, well, how did that happen? Not only does the escape feel totally plausible, just the way that I was saying earlier, that Foster's character, that Clarice, is learning how to use her feminine wiles to manipulate people in different ways. Maybe she has to flirt with them. Maybe she has to play coy with them to be like, oh, I'm just an innocent girl. Let me see him one more time. So she uses these different aspects of herself. He has a secret weapon too, that he understands how to manipulate people. And that is that he is so courteous and he's so kind and he's so calm that people forget how utterly dangerous he is. So that moment where he turns the tables on them is completely believable, because you don't have to be a bodybuilder to get the upper hand of these guys. Once he handcuffs the one guy to the bars, he can do whatever the hell he wants at that moment. And it's incredibly well executed and terrifying, really terrifying. Oh, and what I was mentioning before, that there are these really important set pieces in the film that are so compelling, but some of the greatest action scenes in the film are just those close-ups, right? When Clarice goes back to interview him in the cage right before his escape, that whole conversation about the lambs, when he finally gets that out of her, is a violation of a kind that we're watching on screen. And it is really powerful. And it's all just done like he's behind a cage and he's basically invading her mind. It's a really incredible scene.
Her face when she's telling that story.
Oh my God, so great.
Was incredible. Oh, this movie's so good. I can't believe we were it's so good. To compare it to the previous movie,
it's terrible.
Like, I know. A sin. There's no comparison. I cannot find any.
Yeah, I feel like and like I said, I feel like I probably would have given Longlegs at least half a star more if I hadn't seen this in such close conjunction to it.
Yeah, because I saw it first, and then last night when I saw Longlegs, I was like, so disappointed. And this is when I was liking the movie, which right. I'm still not going to say I don't like, because there's so much good in it. I think if I watch it a second time, I'll be more forgiving, yes. knowing that my expectations are so right. much lower.
Mm-hmm. I think I'd probably be the same. Yeah.
To compare it to Silence of the Lambs was too much. It was a disservice.
It was, truly. And of course, Silence of the Lambs is a one of one, right? Even Manhunter, even Red Dragon, which is based on another Harris novel with Lecter in it as well, which is a copy of Silence of the Lambs. And it's a good movie, by the way. If you just want to see Lecter again, you want to see Hopkins in this role again, Ray Fiennes as the serial killer is terrific in that movie. There's some really good things about it, but it's just an imitation of Silence of the Lambs, with a different story and a compelling one. So I do recommend that one as well. But even that doesn't hold up to Silence of the Lambs. It just has that. Silence of the Lambs just has that extra something. So of course, nothing is going to be, like I said, it's a one of one. Hey, why don't they make one of these every 2 years? This is easy. It's like, it's not easy. It's only happened once. So of course, it's always a disservice to compare them in that regard. And I agree, by the way, what you said about Longlegs in general. If I watch it again with no expectations, I probably will appreciate those things more, because the disappointment has already happened in a way. Some great dialogue in Silence of the Lambs. Most of it is from the book, and Hopkins sells these lines so well. I love that sequence when they bring him out in front of the senator, and Hopkins goes, your nipples get chafed when you nurse your children. When they kill your daughter, where's it going to hurt you? And then she is disgusted by him. And this is all from the book, by the way, disgusted by him. And then he does start to describe Buffalo Bill so that he can get his deal after all. And he goes, Senator, one more thing right before she leaves. And he goes, I love the suit. Honestly, he is pretty campy in his performance. And if it wasn't for the tone of the film, and if it wasn't for him being paired up in almost all his scenes with Clarice and how intense she is, that could have been a disaster. His performance literally could have been terrible, but it works incredibly well because she balances him out. And I think in a way, when they were performing against each other, she brought out the best of him. It's hard to believe that this actor, who's twice as old as this, she's 27 when she makes this movie. And I really feel like Foster got a better performance out of Hopkins. It made his career, right? He was not a star until this moment.
I like that you said that, performing against each other. That's a good observation.
Yeah, I think it's the two of them together. That's the chemistry that makes the movie magic. And that's why I said you just can't be like, oh, this is easy to do. It's like you have all the ingredients when you make a movie. And for me, it's like if all the ingredients are good, you can make a 3-star movie. If all the ingredients are great, you can make a 4-star movie. To get to a 5-star movie, and this is a 5-star movie, there's something magical there. There's the chemistry between the director and the actors, and everything is just, there's something magical happening, and you can't make magic happen. It just doesn't work that way. If it was easy, these movies would be great all the time, and they're not. They're rarely great, actually.
You'd be Longlegs.
Yeah. Longlegs is the ingredients. I take that back. I was going to say it has some great ingredients for me personally, and it has some terrible ingredients. And one of them, very big one, even though Nicolas Cage, like Anthony Hopkins, by the way, is only in like 4 or 5 scenes in the entire movie. It's hard to believe that, by the way. I thought about that as well. As many times have I seen this film, people back in the day were like, can you believe he won Best Actor, even though he's only in 20 minutes of this movie? And I remember when I first heard that, I'm like, he's only in 20 minutes of this movie? That's impossible because he looms so large. And even watching it now, he still feels like he is a bigger part of the movie. And part of that isn't because his performance is so good. I think part of that is because the script is so tight. She goes on her investigation. She finds the head inside the car. And then she goes back to see him. Logically, in the plot, now she's going to go talk to him. He's there exactly when he's supposed to be there. So it feels like he's always there.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I never thought about it like that. But I also thought he was in most of the movie now that I'm thinking about it.
That's the other thing that I think is pretty amazing. Movies now are all over 2 hours long. Longlegs was not. It's actually pretty short. But in general, movies, these big studio movies, are like 2.5 hours, 2 hours and 45 minutes. This movie is not even 2 hours long, and it feels huge. It feels like so many things happen in it. You don't need a 2.5 hour runtime to feel like a big movie. But anyway, 2 hours long or just under 2 hours long, and he's in 20 minutes of it. That's a very small percentage of screen time.
It feels like that because there is no lag.
Right.
It's just constant things are happening, and the movie's just moving along the whole time. There's no weird scene or 10 minutes where nothing really happens, and it's like this buffer or just a space where you can just relax for a second, use the restroom. They don't have any of that in this movie.
And the screenplay is so tight, you can't walk away, like you said, ever. It's not only that things are happening, it's that it happens so seamlessly. In your mind, you're literally on an investigation. So logically, at this point, she has to do this, and then she does that. And then you have to do this, and then she does that. And then just when you get to the point where she's getting close to Buffalo Bill, then we get introduced to the Buffalo Bill character. And then he becomes a bigger and bigger part of the back half of the movie. But that's exactly how it should be. It's really just really well constructed. The screenplay is just so well made. This is the one thing I really got impressed with even more so this time. The performance is obviously there, the direction for constructing the film so well. But I think it comes back to the script. The script is just so tight. There's not a bad scene in this thing.
Even the girl in the pit is impressive.
Yes. I love how she reacts when she's like, you're safe. You're safe now. Like, get back here, you bitch. Don't you dare leave me alone.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah, and she's so intense.
And she's also very badass. She's down there. She takes the dog and uses it for leverage. Like, the whole movie was amazing. Everything.
Yeah. There's not a bad scene in the movie. Like, how rare is that? Oh, I think something that's in the movie, but not in the original book that I wanted to call out in the screenplay, which I think is so good, is when she goes back after she's ripped her pants and she's bleeding and she's been in the rain and she finds the head. And now she's getting excited because now she knows she's on the scent of the actual killer. She shows up to see him that second time. And you'll notice the first time she don't get too close. She gets right to the window. She grabs the towel, which is right there. Right away, she is being more intimate with him. He starts saying, well, tell me about your relationship with Jack Crawford. He wants to sleep with you, blah, 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 blah. And she goes, I don't think about those things, which is probably not true, by the way. But it's like, I don't think about those things. And actually, that is beneath you. That's something that Miggs would say. And this is after he's killed Miggs. And he goes, not anymore. That's such a great piece of dialogue there because it's like, it's funny and it's also intimidating at the same time. No, he's dead now.
That situation is really gross. That's interesting. Did he kill Miggs because he just found him so vile because of what he did? Or was it,
well,
what was he doing?
He could have killed them at any time.
I know, but was he defending her honor? Was he angry because Miggs... The characters are very complicated. It made me wonder why he killed Miggs.
I think he said it this is explicitly in the books and they said it in the movie as well. He says that he was discourteous to her. And if you've read the Hannibal book, which is all in Hannibal's, not a great film, by the way, but that's a very mixed bag for sure. The movie, the book as well. The book is a mess, but an interesting one, especially because you get to spend so much time in Hannibal's head. And Hannibal kills people once he's on the lam. He only kills people when he finds them to be rude. So he has a real problem with someone being discourteous. So I guess when Miggs is messing with the guards and he's obnoxious, his chaos is entertaining to him in some way, or at least that chaos gives him potentially some means of escape or potentially manipulation in the future. But I think he did just feel like that was out of line. He ends up, I don't know if you could actually convince somebody to choke themselves to death on their own tongue. That could be almost supernatural powers there at that point. But I think that's why he does what he does, supposedly.
Yeah. So his supernatural powers, like the way he's able to get people to do things is just by getting in their heads. Because I don't think that Miggs was very smart. I don't know how hard he hit him.
Schizophrenic. Yeah, he's not some genius. Yeah, exactly.
In Longlegs, we have that guy somehow getting all these people to do the same thing that I guess Hannibal could do if he wanted to. But it turns out that's not even what's happening. But I was questioning this when I was watching Longlegs and still trying to compare it to Silence of the Lambs. I'm like, oh, because he's got like a way of making people do what he wants them to do because he's manipulating them with his brain. But the character was so like, ooh.
Yeah.
So I'm like, no, that guy's not going to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no way.
Yeah, you can't compare these things, but you think about Lecter versus Longlegs and imagine Lecter, this very intelligent, erudite person who couldn't possibly be this monster. When you think about Red Dragon, which the Manhunter and the movie Red Dragon are based on, and you see a little bit of his backstory, or you discover more about his backstory, he was messing with his own patients. So that's how he began this kind of practice as a serial killer, which is fascinating. And of course, he's this person who got sick of listening to his patients complain about things and started to mess with them, right? But like you said, the Longlegs, it's just like that guy shows up and you're like, you call the cops right away. Literally in the movie, he shows up at the house and she called the cops, right? So it's like, it's not the same thing at all. Once again, it's not really a parallel we could draw. One thing I think
there are no parallels.
The one thing that has not aged very well here, potentially, and was problematic even at the time, but much more so now, is obviously this representation of a trans person, if you believe this person to be a trans person specifically. How do you think that they deal with that? Lecter does pay some lip service here to say he's not actually trans, this character. He is just someone who hates himself and is trying to transform himself into something else. He just thinks that he's trans. Even at the time, people thought this was an offensive representation of a trans person. And of course, nowadays, this film would have to be significantly rewritten just for that plot point. But how did you think that they dealt with that in general?
I believe the part where he's so messed up, he doesn't even know who he is. He can't really, he's trying to attach himself to something. So somehow he turns out being trans or trying to go for that. But it didn't bother me at all. I know what you're trying to say. Did it come off as offensive or did they pull it off? I think they pulled it off because I wasn't that distracted by it. I believed it, that he's just this guy. He's not in touch with realities. He's making skin suits and killing people. Right. So his wearing lipstick or whatever he was doing was the least weird thing about him. Right. I wasn't that distracted by it. Did you feel like they were being offensive?
I remember seeing it back in the day, and there were people who wrote about it being offended by that particular thing. I always felt like the film is not trying to be edgy in that way. I think the film is trying to explain his psychology, and it's based on a real life case, the Ed Gein case, where this person made a woman's suit out of corpses, out of dead people. I think he might have killed his mother, though. But anyway, the Ed Gein case is the inspiration for Psycho, the book and the movie, as well as Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So there is some reference point to that in real life, although it's nowhere near as, crazy as those films or this one is. But I don't think Ed Gein would be classified as a trans person either, even back in the day. So I think that's the reference point they're making to this real life case. And I think that they have that scene where Lecter specifically says that in the book as well. The author, by the way, Clarice, is a gay man. So I don't think that he was trying to offend trans people in his writing. But I do remember the write-up at the time. And like now, of course, with people being touchy about trans issues now, it seems like it's even in more bad taste. But it hasn't aged that way because I think it's just like a fact about this guy. I don't think the film is trying to be political about trans people. I don't think it has a point of view in that regard. There is something sad about him, though. I got to say, I remember even the first time I saw it, we don't know anything about Buffalo Bill's backstory. And when he dies at the end and she shoots out the window and we see he had been, I think this is more from the book than it's just hinted at there, but you see the helmet and he had been in Vietnam, I believe, but he had been in the military. So here's this guy who his whole entire life had been struggling with himself, trying to define himself in these different ways. So there's something very sad about him. An incredibly dangerous person. Like we want him to die. Don't get me wrong. But he's pathetic. There's something very pathetic about him, which I think is the intention of the film as well. And pathetic in a way that works for me, not in the way that Longlegs, once again, to draw that parallel, doesn't quite work.
Yeah, he came off pathetic, but also like he could assimilate into society,
yes,
maybe
exactly.
get a job,
yes.
probably even, bad looking.
He think about it. When she shows up at the door, he code switches really well. Like he gets her into the house, right? He gets her into the house, but then it starts to crack, which is an incredible scene, by the way. That whole scene is really great. When he escapes, you see how green she is to let him escape. She had been a more seasoned FBI agent. That would be an easy arrest. And she fucks it up and lets him get into the kitchen where the gun is. And I love the scene where she kicks the door, by the way, and it like kicks back on her, which I'm sure was a mistake in the take, but they kept it because that's exactly what she would have done. She's like so full of adrenaline and she kicks the door and it slams back shut on her. Yeah, all the details of that are just really great. Okay, so Celia, I wanted to review with you some upcoming movies. We saw a lot of trailers for a lot of these movies, by the way, before Longlegs yesterday. I tried to avoid the trailers, but they go on for so long that even when I get there late, I still see the trailers. So I have seen some of these. I want to get your opinion on these and just announce them. But before we wrap up Silence of the Lambs, the question I'd have for you, maybe more directly, in seeing it again, and I don't know how long it's been since you've seen it, but did you have any new takeaways, anything that stood out now more than last time you saw it?
This is a type of movie where if you watch it more than once, you like it more, even knowing what's coming up, because I was riveted by Jodie Foster's performance. I already knew that the other performances were good, but I noticed things about her now that I'm older that I didn't notice when I was younger. Her just being so naive and being thrown into the situation before she was ready for it because they needed a pretty face to disarm him. So those kinds of things are the types of things that I took away this time around. I knew she was good, but I was more impressed this time around than I was previous. It gave me a much bigger appreciation of the quality of movie that I was watching when I'm comparing it to Longlegs.
Everything else?
Yeah.
For me, the thing that stood out now, which I always appreciated, but maybe appreciated more now than ever, I always had an aversion to cynicism in movies. I don't mind if a movie's dark. I just don't like it to be cynical. And for me, cynicism indicates it's almost like a put on, like why give a crap about something, right? Or just this thing that nothing matters, like a pure nihilistic point of view. But I always loved this film, which is a dark film. And I always liked the fact that there was not really light to it, but that it wasn't a cynical film. It's basically my general opinion of it. And what I liked so much about seeing it now, I'd say, is that I think about Foster or Clarice's, the character's decency. And I think Foster's as well as a performer. So those kinds meshed well together. But I think that her decency is like a superpower, right? It not only drives her to solve this case and rescue this person and in a way rescue herself, but Lecter won't touch her because it's like she's a real person. She's not just here to score some points or get a reputation for locking me up, or they're in it for their own petty BS. She's an actually legitimately noble person, and he doesn't want to mess with her for that reason. He like appreciates he's not a noble person at all. She tells him the lamb story and he goes and orders lamb chops, right? Like he's not a good person, right? But he appreciates the fact that she is legitimately a good person. So it makes her a superhero, and her superpower is being a good person, which is so rare to see anywhere, honestly.
When she told that story, I imagined everything she was saying and how horrible that must have been. And it made me never want to eat lamb chops.
Exactly. But it shows you, to your point, it shows you like the film is telling you, don't start thinking that Hannibal's a nice guy just because he has this affinity for her. Because like you said, after you hear that, you're like, man, I don't know if I might, maybe I should be a vegetarian. He orders lamb chops. That's his reaction to that story. Okay, let's get into some upcoming movies. The first half of the movie year, 2024, has been pretty disappointing. I thought 2023, my personal opinion, pretty disappointing after 2022 being a real standout year for horror. And not only a standout year in general with the quality of the movies, but when the box office was really struggling to come back after the pandemic, horror movies were doing awesome. These little cheap horror movies were making huge amounts of money. And I felt like, ooh, there could be like a golden age of horror films. 2023 was disappointing. There's a couple of good films in there. I don't want to make this conversation too broad by calling up every possible good movie. But I also felt that the first half of this year was pretty disappointing. In general, I was unimpressed with most of what I saw. There's a couple of standouts. I don't know if you want to call some out. I thought The First Omen was very good. And as a pair to Immaculate, I thought both of them were good. First Omen was better of the two, I thought. That's about it, actually, like in the first half of the year. Was there anything that stood out to you in the first half of the year before we talk about what's come out very recently and then what's coming later in the year?
I loved that they had The Exorcist. What was that? There were two Exorcists done back to back by the same actor.
Pope's Exorcist?
That's it. It was the Pope's, Exorcist,
the Pope's Exorcist
and The Exorcist. And he's like the same character in both of these movies, but yet
did you watch though? Did you watch the new one that he did? It came out a few weeks ago. I heard it was horrible. Have you seen that one?
It is ridiculous. I got through like half of it, but I actually liked the Pope's Exorcist not because it was scary, but because
it was funny. It's very funny.
It is so funny. I couldn't tell. I'm like, are these people like mocking the character that they were given, so they're just making it satirical?
They're making a sequel. They're making a sequel to that movie, by the way.
My God, that movie was so funny. I really liked that movie, but only because it was making me laugh. And I couldn't tell if I was supposed to be laughing.
That movie's very funny. It's not a good movie, I agree. But maybe I am looking forward to the next one. I got to say, there's nothing funnier to me in that movie than when you see, not the body shame, but what's his name? Crowe. What's his first name?
Russell
Crowe. That when Russell Crowe leaves Rome on his Vespa, and he's a big guy now, right? He's bigger than he's been. He was always like a thick guy, but now he's pretty chubby. Nothing wrong. I've gained weight as I got older too. I'm not shaming him for that. I'm just saying that this guy in this not form-fitting outfit, riding his Vespa, leaving Rome is funny, right? That's funny. That's not the funny part. That's not the part that made me laugh out loud. when he shows up in Scotland or Ireland or whatever on the Vespa, I'm like, how did he get to Ireland on his Vespa? How did that happen? Did he ride it onto a ferry and then sit on the, I picture him on the Vespa on the ferry crossing the channel. He couldn't take a train. He took the Vespa all the way to Scotland.
And then his performances are so over the top. They are so dramatic.
Okay, we're gonna run out of time. We're gonna run out of time again. We have to put a pin in that one. If they make a sequel to that movie, we should definitely revisit for sure. But yeah, that's a whole half-hour conversation about that crazy movie. But that was from last year, by the way. But you probably saw it this year because it was very popular on Netflix, I think, this year. So it's hard; these things bleed together. But okay, let me talk about the first half of the year for me. Pretty disappointing. But then right at the very end of the first half, I do want to call this one out because we just saw it. I know you saw it as well. That In a Violent Nature, this slasher movie from the point of view of the slasher character, the supernatural slasher. I love this movie. This was, and this is definitely like your mileage may vary. I know people who hate this movie passionately. I loved it. It worked for me so well. And I do want to call that out, even though it was in the first half of the year, because this is a Shudder original movie. And it was going to premiere on Shudder any day now. Maybe has premiered this weekend, actually, as far as I know. And also because everything that goes on Shudder eventually ends up on Hulu. So this is going to be very easily available to many people. So do keep an eye out if you are curious about it. I thought it was fantastic.
Some people are complaining, it was a little bit boring or there was a little lag. But I disagree because we're in his head.
Yeah. It's like mesmerizing.
It is pretty boring up there. We're mesmerized because we know we're in his head. But like for him, it's not like that many interesting things are happening. Hence him just going off on killing sprees to almost entertain himself. He's completely almost supernatural. He's
definitely supernatural.
So I like that. It was very well evoked.
Yeah, I was really impressed with it. Okay, so we kicking off the second half of the year. We start off with Maxine, which was, I think, for the most part, very successful. We probably have to have a side conversation on that at some point too, because it didn't fully work for me, but I did like the whole 80s style of it. Kicked off the second half of the year solidly with that just 1 week ago. Now, of course, Longlegs completely overperforming. It's probably going to be one of the biggest horror hits of the year. And then we have on the 26th, we have The Beast Within, Kit Harington, Jon Snow himself. I think this is a werewolf movie. And we have August 2nd, Trap, M. Night Shyamalan's new film.
I love him.
What did you think about the trailer? You definitely saw the trailer for this, right?
I love it. I love everything about him. And again, Carlos is like, I don't know if I even want to see this movie because every time lately I've just been disappointed. And I'm like, I am never disappointed by this guy. His mind is from outer space. And even if the movie's not like, wow, that was a good movie, maybe it wasn't a good movie. I'm never bored in his movies. I don't know where his brain is going. So this latest movie that is coming out, it to me looks amazing because we have this incognito, I guess, serial killer from what I could tell.
Yeah.
That they have trapped, but they don't know who it is. And he knows about this by mistake. And he's in this place he can't get out of.
He needs to escape.
With his daughter.
Yes, exactly.
Who he took to a concert.
Right.
So he's got to get out of there with her. And nobody can know who he is, especially not his daughter. So I am so excited to see this movie.
Yeah, I felt, even when I saw the teaser for this movie, I felt like I didn't want to know. I feel like that's such a big part of the movie is the premise of it in a way. I almost would prefer not to know the premise of it.
I always prefer not to know. Always. Every time. Can't think of once when that wasn't true.
Given the new trailer, by the way, in the original teaser, I'm like, is this like a big twist in the movie that they're trying to get us to see the movie? When you see this trailer that I saw with Longlegs, you realize that, no, like this is probably revealed very early in the film. And then, of course, we're with him the whole entire time while he tries to get out of this circumstance, which is interesting because it can be very exciting to be like can be arrested at any moment. But then it makes you, in a way, root for the bad guy, which is an interesting setup. Yeah. So I agree, by the way. I find many of M. Night's films to be disastrously bad. In the end, they fall apart under their own ambitions in a way. But like you said, I'll watch them because they're crazy. Like when he goes for it, he really goes for it. Right. So
I agree. I don't think it's a bad idea that the trailer lets you know these things right away, because you are right. It feels like from this trailer that you would know almost immediately. What are you only going to be mystified for the first 4 minutes? You might as well put it in the trailer.
here's the funniest thing, by the way, about M. Night is that he's not afraid of nepotism. There's a lot of like talk in Hollywood now that everybody who gets a job was like connected to Hollywood in some way. And there's all this Nepo babies. He has fully embraced Nepo babyism, by the way. The movie The Watchers, which I couldn't make it through. I only watched the first half of it. I couldn't watch it all the way through, which came out earlier this summer, was directed by his daughter. And it's produced by him. He funded it through his own production company. She directed it. She learned how to direct. She's only like 20 something years old. She started directing on Servant, the TV series he produces, until it wrapped up last year. And she directed some of those episodes. Straight up nepotism. He funds her movie, which did okay at the box office, by the way. So it wasn't a total disaster. And here's the funniest thing about nepotism in this movie. The concert they go to is supposedly this girl who is a huge star. The girl who's performing you hear the music throughout the entire movie, basically, is his daughter. She's a musician, and he's going to put her music wall to wall in the entire movie. He's like, hey, I can make them famous. I'm going to do it. Okay. The next week after that, this is the first I've seen of this movie. I've heard about it. It played at some film festivals earlier this year, but it's the first trailer I saw for it, was Cuckoo, which they also played before Longlegs. This is with Hunter Schafer from Euphoria and Dan Stevens as well. It's a very strange trailer, although the reviews have been pretty positive on it. So I'm curious about that one. August 16 comes Alien Romulus. So this is the new Alien movie from Fede Alvarez, the guy who directed the Evil Dead 2013 movie, which I think is great, by the way, and Don't Breathe, which I think is great, by the way. So I'm very excited about this new version of the Alien story.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that.
And the trailer is terrifying. It's like the original movie, but going with really gory kills. So yeah, really, I'm very interested in this one. August 23rd, we have The Crow, which I've heard is terrible, by the way. And Blink Twice, which is Channing Tatum starring in a movie directed by Zoe Kravitz, which at first I thought it was a comedy, but apparently it's a horror movie about something strange going on. This guy gets these girls to go to this island with him, supposedly to party or become models, and something strange is happening on the island. And anyway, I'm curious about this. I think seeing Channing Tatum in a villainous role could be interesting. I like Zoe Kravitz. I'd like to see her make a movie, obviously. So I'm curious about this one. There's not any early screenings on this yet or anything, but I am curious. Then we have the very next week, we have a AI horror movie about a smart house that starts to manipulate the people inside of it, called Afraid.
That looks good.
Yeah. Then September 6th, we have the Beetlejuice sequel, which is going to be one of the biggest movies of the back half of the year. And we have this movie called The Front Room, which stars Brandy, which I think this movie is going to be terrible. It looks on paper like it's going to be terrible, but it is from A24. It's got a very prestigious pedigree, so maybe it's going to be good. So I'll put a pin in it for now. That's both of those movies coming out on September 6th. So like I said, this is almost every single week. The very next week, Celia, I know you want to talk about this one, the Speak No Evil remake is coming out on September 13th. What did you think about this trailer?
This trailer has a completely different tone from the first movie. The
scenes are note for note, and they're the
Carlos.
They're some of the most important scenes in the movie. Yes. I find it terrible.
I told him this is a terrible trailer that they show so much, because he didn't see the original. He was horrified, and he's like, "Oh no, I think I heard something about it, and I don't know if I could see that." But I loved it just for being so disturbing. And this one has a completely different tone that's very over the top. But yeah, your remarks on the trailer are great, because what I said to him is he goes, "Oh, this looks good." I go, "But it's got a different tone." I go, "And I don't like that they showed so much." And he was okay with it. But I'm like, you don't understand. All of the stuff they're showing is what's most horrifying about the first movie, because you don't know what's going on until these things happen, and they just showed them in the trailer.
Right.
So I don't like that.
The button,
I don't know.
I don't want to spoil too much here, but I guess they already did in the trailer. Maybe skip 30 seconds ahead. If anybody's listening to this, skip 30 seconds ahead if you don't want to hear this.
And don't watch the trailer.
Don't watch the trailer. Absolutely do not watch the trailer for this movie. But more than that is, Celia, specifically the button on the trailer, the very last image of the trailer. That is a horrifying thing that happens in the movie. And to basically explicitly say, and by the way, this is going to happen in the movie. In the trailer, I'm like, what are you doing? What is the point of this movie? Insane to me. Insane.
Yeah, that's crazy. You don't do that.
This is why I don't watch trailers, because they make trailers like this. Anyway.
Even when the guy's like, oh, I'm not a doctor. Yes, I am a doctor. Right. What are you doing?
Exactly.
Or
feeding her the meat. Feeding her. Think about how that
turning point. Yeah.
Yes,
and
right.
The meat.
Yeah. They should have done the opposite of this, where there are so many scenes where maybe I'm overreading into this, and then they push too hard. Same thing with the scene in the restaurant when they go out and they talk about them still being horny for each other after a certain number of years. Again, it's one of those scenes that they cross a line. And the trailer has all of the scenes in it. You should have done the trailer where you're like, are they really in danger, or are they overreading this, right? Which is 80% of the movie. And what they did in the trailer was put in the scenes where you know that something is wrong is happening. And they put it all in the trailer. Insane. What a decision.
I'm still going to see the movie because I'm so curious how they're going to remake it. It looks scene for scene like the other movie.
The dialogue is the same. The dialogue is the same.
Yeah,
dialogue, everything's the same.
In the other movie, everything was so subtle that exactly what you were saying. Something's wrong, but what is it? Okay, people can be annoying or weird. And all of a sudden, there are the turning points that are in this trailer, and horrifying things occur by the end of this movie where you're left feeling just despondent, empty, just horrified. Because again, like the things people do to each other are so much scarier than magic dolls. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be good. I don't, because of everything we just said, but I'm still going to see it. I want to see how in the world are they translating the original, which is really good. And
it's also, I think it's completely unnecessary, to be totally honest with you. The original can be seen on Hulu, I think, right now. So it's easily available to American audiences. And by the way, the only reason to remake this movie is because, oh man, I hate reading subtitles. These people are two different nationalities. So I think importantly in the film, the common language where they speak to each other is English. Like 80% of the dialogue is in English. And then, by the way, when they speak to each other in this foreign language, which of course is not going to work in this adaptation if they're all speaking English to each other all the time, there are times when they speak to each other in Danish or whatever the other language is, and we do not see subtitles. So we're not supposed to know what they're saying in those moments. We're supposed to feel like this couple, why are they talking this way behind our back, basically in front of our faces? You can't do that when they all speak English. Like, it's so bizarre. Like I said, you have a movie that's 80% in English, and then the stuff that you need to translations for, the movie intentionally does not translate for you. So just watch the other movie. I don't understand. It's so frustrating.
I agree.
All right. The very next week, though, that's probably going to make money because it's from Blumhouse too. So anyway, so September 20th, next week, we have two movies coming out that have a lot of buzz around them. One is called A Different Man. And this is Sebastian Sands, who plays Bucky from the Avengers movies. And basically, he is someone who has like a facial deformity, and he has a surgery, like a new procedure that makes him handsome, like a movie star, right? And his whole life changes. But then it starts to mess with him. It has comedic elements, but horror elements as well. And this has gotten some really strong reviews. I'm very curious about seeing this. I just like the premise of it so much that someone who no one will look at you is suddenly beautiful to look at, like, and how that messes with your whole psychology. That's called A Different Man. And the very same weekend, a movie called The Substance is coming out. And this is starring Demi Moore. Also, this movie has gotten rave reviews from the film festivals. And it's about a substance that women can take that basically keeps them beautiful. It's got interesting overlapping of themes here with these two movies, but it keeps them beautiful. But then there's a price to pay, of course, with that as well. And it's supposed to be like really a biting satire of the culture today. And anyway, the reviews, I'm pretty much unspoiled on it, so I don't want to know too much about it. But 2 movies coming out the same weekend that I'm very excited about. So much more so than the remake of a movie that I already saw, which was good, but hey, I saw it already. So
I love Demi Moore. I hope that
she
was
looks
amazing.
incredible. She looks incredible,
Yeah.
by the way. Incredible.
She's
She's like
beautiful.
60 years old and she still looks incredible. That's also like I see like how Selma Hayek, like on her Instagram or whatever, and you're like, how old is this lady? This woman looks incredible. September 27th, 1 week later after that, we have Never Let Go. This is a supernatural movie about a mother trying to protect her kids. She lives out in the woods. I'm not sure if this is going to be good or not, but it has Halle Berry in it. It has got some interesting talent behind the camera. So maybe this is a good one, September 27th. And then we get to October. There's probably additional things, but there's just few of them I'll call out. Terrifier 3. I don't like the Terrifier movies, but they've become very popular, so I'll call it out. It's coming out, Terrifier 3, October 11th. Carlos likes slashers. Does he like Terrifier? Has he seen the Terrifier?
I think we tried to watch it, but we only got halfway, so I guess he doesn't love
It's
them.
extremely bloody kills and this really creepy looking clown, and basically that's the entire movie. And like I said, I'm not a fan of these things, but the last one was a big hit, and I'm sure this one will be even bigger. Next week, here's something I definitely want to talk to you about. What did you think about the trailer for this movie? Because I know you saw it for sure. Smile 2, coming out October 18th.
It did not impress me because
Me neither.
Smile 1 was so good. It was so creepy and eerie. The whole concept was, it looks like they're just doing a spin-off just because the first one did well. That's what it feels like.
Definitely, yeah. And maybe I could be completely wrong about this, but of the ways you could have expanded the storyline to have a celebrity get infected, is that something I wanted to see based on the first movie? I don't know. But maybe they're going to do something clever with it. But I'm not really enthusiastic at this point about this. I'll still see it though. But the first one was very good. I thought it worked really well. And what else do we have here? A couple more things I wanted to call out. One is Heretic, which I think we saw the trailer for with Hugh Grant, another A24.
That looks so good.
Looks good. November 22nd. A24 in general is like a brand. I think A24 horror movies usually are pretty strong. So I think this one looks really good. And then a couple more from December. One is December 6th, Night Bitch, which is Amy Adams, directed by Academy Award nominated director Mariel Heller. And it's about a woman who starts to get convinced, Amy Adams, who's one of my favorite actresses, by the way, starts to be convinced that at night she's turning into a dog. And it's not supposed to be comedic. I think it's supposed to be disturbing. And anyway, so that's an interesting one. And that's coming December 6th. I'm always interested when an actor or actress that I'm a fan of that is considered more respectable decides to do something that's totally batshit crazy. And I'm like, I'm there for it. I want to see her try. And of course, December 27th, David Eggers' new film, the Nosferatu remake, which apparently the early buzz on it, I've not seen any of the trailers or some of the early images, but people say it's visually absolutely astounding. And this is the guy who made The Lighthouse. He made The Northman. He made The Witch. So visually, this movie is going to be absolutely knockout.
I saw that trailer. Amazing.
It'll be beautiful. And that one I'm really looking forward to. And that's December 27th. And like I said, there'll be other things that fill in. A few things that are undated here that I want to call out for sure. Following up on the Alien movie, Noah Hawley, who makes Fargo, has an Alien TV series coming in October. Something else to look forward to. And I think the two storylines are intermingled somehow. Second of all, there's a movie that everyone was raving about when it played at film festivals early this year called It's What's Inside. It's undated because it's with Netflix. Netflix never dates their movies until a day before they premiere them. So it's coming sometime at the end of this year. They spent $17 million to acquire this movie, and everybody was really enthusiastic about it. So I'm really looking forward to that. It's about a bunch of friends who are at a getaway together. One of their friends shows up, and they have brought something like as a party game, but it's not a party game. There's something else going on, and it leads to something starts happening to the group of friends. And I don't know anything about it because every single review is like, do not know anything about this movie before you go see it. So I've done that. I know very little about it, but very curious about that one. It's coming to Netflix sometime later in the year. Salem's Lot, which was shot 3 years ago, still has not come out. And supposedly it's coming out this year. I don't know. I feel like this thing apparently was so bad that it's not going to be released at this point. They spent like $100 million making a very popular Stephen King novel into a movie. and they're never going to release it. I guess that's what's going to happen. Anyway, maybe we'll finally see it later this year. Oh, and one more thing I want to call out, which I've already seen, a French movie called Red Rooms, which is coming out in September. I don't know if it's coming to theaters or to home video, but something to check out. If you want something that condemns our fascination with serial killers and true crime in a way that I think Longlegs tries to do a little bit, but doesn't really succeed, this movie is terrifying, and it has no horror elements to it at all. It's about a woman who is fixated on a serial killer, and she's in the gallery of the court because she's a fan of the killer, or we think she is. And it's just the psychology of this woman who is really smart, very isolated, very online. She does all these investigations on her own, and we spend so much time with her. It's so uncomfortable. This movie will make you feel so uncomfortable. And it's brilliant. And it's called Red Rooms. And it's been around for over a year now. It's in French, but French-Canadian production. But it is coming out later this year. And I really recommend this to you, Celia.
Interesting.
Good one. Yeah. And as far on the TV side of things, some of the big stuff has been pushed out to 2025. Welcome to Derry, which is a spinoff of the movie It that takes place in the town of Derry. It's been pushed out to 2025. That's on HBO. Last of Us Season 2 has been pushed out to 2025. So 2025 cram-packed with stuff because of the writer's strike. Everything got pushed off to 2025. But I think the second half of 2024 has some really impressive titles on there. Of all the things I mentioned there, is there anything you're looking forward to the most?
Yes. The one where the girls go to the house and get lured in when they're trying to convert. What was that one called?
Oh, Heretic. Heretic?
Yes, Heretic. I'm dying to see Heretic, and I'm dying to see Demme more.
Yeah, that Substance, I think, is going to be a really good one. So, yeah, I'm very excited. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Oh, I really want to see that Alien movie, too. I'm always a fan.
Yes.
So, and Trap. I think even if Trap is bad, I'll definitely be entertained.
Yeah.
Because, for example,
you're
like
correct.
The Happening is one of the worst movies ever, but it is so entertaining.
It is.
As is The Woman in the Water.
Oh, it was Woman in the Water, but she was in a pool.
She was in a pool, exactly.
It was the haunted pool.
Haunted pool.
And she was a mermaid.
not to be confused with this year's haunted pool movie. So.
But they were so good. I loved The Village.
I like the Village is really good until the end.
Really good. I loved the end of The Village.
That didn't work for me. That's a bad ending.
Oh, it totally worked.
Oh yeah, I'm still there. People, and by the way, I'm not alone. His movies still make money. That's why he keeps making them. Even when people make fun of him, they keep going to his movies. All right. I think that is it for the rest of the horror in 2024. We may have to do another episode at some point in the future where we round up. Maybe what we could do is we can do a little bit a recap of the first half of the year and throw that in with how did the summer play out. And we can dig into all these other movies we've seen, including Maxine and other ones. Cool. So let's leave that for around Labor Day when we've seen a lot of these products.
Sounds wonderful. All right, bye.
So that's the conversation. And as I mentioned, Sona and I will be meeting late this week to discuss the 2 most recent episodes of Presumed Innocent. Stay tuned for that. And I'll be introducing some of the new series we'll be covering in the next few months. Take care. I'll talk to you soon.